Good evening, church family. This is your parish pastor, Nathan Hoag, coming to you from my office. Hopefully you all know by now that we have postponed our normal worship gatherings in response to the coronavirus outbreak around the globe. It wasn't an easy decision to make, and as you might guess by my personality, I was the last one of us to get on board with closing a coma. But as the events of the last few days have transpired, I've grown in my understanding of what happens when this virus goes unchecked, like it did in Iran and Italy, and I think closing our building to large gatherings is a smart move, and I'm glad that we did it. I'm also excited that we're not in a situation where we need to fully quarantine everyone all the time. We in Denver have the luxury of still gathering in small groups and practicing social distancing while we're together in the same space. And that's exactly what we're going to do tonight in my backyard. Tonight we're going to baptize a few of our parishioners, sing a few songs, and participate in the prayers of the people, including some new prayers that Hosanna has written in response to the pandemic that we find ourselves in. I hope you'll join us at 5 o'clock in my backyard. I think it's going to be a really great time. For at least this Sunday and next Sunday, we're going to record the homily like a podcast and post it to iTunes and Google Play and Spotify for you to interact with whenever you're able. I encourage you to set aside a time to listen to it all the way through and engage in the questions at the end with family, roommates, or neighbors, just like you would with our Sunday evening worship gathering. Each week you carve out an hour or so to be here at 5 p.m. for songs, prayers, and teaching, and I hope you'll keep this as a scheduled rhythm in your life over the next few weeks. I think that maintaining rhythm and practice in our life will help us stay healthy and strong and ready to hit the ground running when this pandemic comes to an end. Don't let your spiritual and relational domains atrophy during this time. I frankly don't think that they have to, and I think that with rhythm and practice, we can avoid that. I'll be reading from a script each week, so apologies in advance if this sounds a little wooden. There's also no one here to laugh with me or cry with me, so I'm going to use a laugh track to make things lively. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. I promise I won't make this even cheesier than it already is. Before I jump into story, I want to remind you that we find ourselves in the season of Lent. We practice giving up and taking up throughout this season together. We give up things that distract us from God's peace and presence. We also take up practices that help us make space for God to speak and to act. Henry Nouwen says, if we create space in which God can act and speak, something surprising can happen. Lent is a beautiful season for creating space and listening for God. It is in this season that we learn to listen and long for the resurrection. We wait and we hope with great anticipation for Easter and all that the season of Eastertide holds for the world. Throughout this season, our family of churches is studying the Beatitudes together, and tonight we're going to focus on the third Beatitude. When I was in college, I was put in charge of leading a men's Bible study through the Baptist Student Union. There were maybe 30 or 40 men, college-aged men in this study, and each of them was a part of a small group connected to the larger study. We'd all start the evening together for a lesson of some kind, and then we'd split up into our groups for some deeper and more specific conversation around certain parts of the Bible. As the leader of the whole thing, me and my friend Matt were in charge of the large group part. We were asked to put together some kind of lesson or message for the whole group that they could then discuss in their small groups. We didn't like that idea very much. We felt that it was kind of boring, so we decided that in addition to a lesson at the beginning of each meeting, we would blow something up to rile everyone up and then dismiss them to their groups for an unnecessarily lively discussion. Yes, this is exactly as ridiculous as it sounds. Did I mention to you that we were in college? These were not my finest leadership moments at all. One night we showed up and there had been a miscommunication. Matt thought that I was going to prepare the thing to blow up, and I thought that it was his week to have that ready. You can imagine the frustration when we discovered that with no time to remedy the situation, there was nothing to explode. Panicked and not wanting to disappoint what was strangely a growing Bible study, we improvised at the last second, and I told Matt that he needed to punch me in front of everybody in order to kick things off with a bang and not disappoint the people who had gathered there to see something explode. Again, I know that this sounds insane. Please do not judge me. I had no idea what I was doing. I thought that Matt was going to punch me in the stomach or the shoulder. I don't really remember that evening very well for good reason. All I remember is making the suggestion that he punch me. He needed a little bit of coaxing because he's a very kind and nonviolent person. And then he just hauled off and hit me right there in front of everybody. He pulled back his fist, thrust it forward into my left cheekbone, and followed through, which was totally unnecessary because just a regular old punch would have been just fine. I should add that Matt is about 6'6" and weighs like 250. I, on the other hand, am 5'6" and weigh like 130. There's a reason why boxers have weight classes, and this is what we would call an unfair advantage. Needless to say, this was not my finest moment of judgment by any means. But when you consider the mistakes that people often make in college, this is probably not the worst story that you've ever heard. Although this group of men was certainly unique, and that night in particular was perhaps the strangest night of all, this kind of rough and tough, beat your chest, eat meat, blow stuff up masculinity has gone hand in hand with Christianity for a long time, if not for its entire history. Some of you are familiar with churches that have men's retreats that feature axe throwing, steak eating, and football throwing. Apparently men like to throw things. Likewise, you're familiar with women's retreats that feature tea and calligraphy and crocheting. If you're under the impression that I am describing church retreats from 50 years ago, make no mistake, these kinds of retreats are probably happening somewhere as we speak. It's worth noting that there's nothing inherently wrong with these things. I guess I could argue that eating steak has some inherent negative consequences, but that's not really my point. Tea is delicious. Axes are practically begging to be thrown. Most people like throwing a football, I guess. Everyone loves getting away for a weekend to reflect and to rest. Retreats are great, and gender-specific ones can be really, really meaningful. But somewhere along the way, we've paired aggression with masculinity and passivity with femininity. And it's not just throughout our societal structures either. These are deeply embedded into the ways that we go about the work of the church. The world needs bad boys and good girls. Boys need trucks and dirt and fistfights. Girls need dolls and dresses and coddling. The Bible study that I led in college was an extreme example for sure, but it's safe to say that stereotypical masculinity and stereotypical femininity are rampant in our religious institutions as well as our society. Frankly, we simply lack imagination in this regard. We have a very narrow understanding of what people are supposed to be like, and I think that it's keeping us from living the life that Jesus set before us. When we adopted our son Lucas into our family, we were all of a sudden faced with raising our first boy from infancy. We've raised other boys, but only for a few months at a time, and they were already several years old when we met them. This was different. We were seeing the difference between nature and nurture and how that affects a boy differently than it affected a girl. One of the things that we notice is how others would describe him. They described him as aggressive, loves his trucks, always playing in the dirt. Meanwhile, our daughters are described with more passive and gentle characteristics. They love their dresses. They love their dolls. They're known to be more sensitive. Now, keep in mind, some of these things are true of my kids, but here's the catch. They're all true of all of my kids. People just don't always see these characteristics in all my kids because they're blinded by gender stereotypes. There's one child in our household who likes to cuddle more than any other. You might think that child who likes to cuddle is one of my daughters, but it's not. It's my son. He grabs a blanket anytime an adult or a child sits down and he says coz over and over again, which means cozy. He wants to be cozy. There's one child in my household who will out-sweat any kid you've ever met. They will have more bruises than any of the other children. They will be dirtier than any of the others. This child is Lucy. She totally wins summer every single year. You know how the weather has been nice the last few days? Lucy is immediately and instantly covered in bruises and sweat and scrapes and dirt. You should see her shins and knees. It's amazing. You know who is the most aggressive in our household? All of them. Every single one of them. All of my children are aggressive. God did not give us passive children. Aggression in our household knows no gender roles. The way we see people and what we assume about them often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're working pretty hard to use different adjectives to describe Lucas than the ones that are often pegged to him. We are working to change the narrative about him early on because you know what happens when a boy is told that he's aggressive his whole life? He starts acting more aggressive. It's who he is after all, right? You know what happens when a boy is called a thug or rough or a typical boy early on? they start to live into those roles and it becomes an excuse for disrespect, anger, aggression, and even abuse and assault. Boys will be boys, quote unquote, is a cop-out that gives boys permission to mistreat women, themselves, and other boys because it's supposed to be just in their nature. Somehow that Y chromosome makes it okay to say and do whatever they want to whomever they want. And yet to a group of probably mostly men, Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are those who aren't bad boys or bad girls, but those who are authentically themselves. Those who are genuinely the human beings that God created them to be. Blessed are those who are calm, quiet, kind, gentle. Blessed are those who reverse war, not those who start war. Blessed are those who love others, not those who are aggressive towards others. Blessed are those who are humble and purposefully fade into the background so that someone else can have the spotlight. Blessed are those who show generosity, not those who hoard and keep and gather power and wealth for their own sake. Blessed are the meek." Now, meekness is not a word that we use very often, but I can confidently say that it's not something that any of us aspire to. Have you ever tried to be meek? Have you ever thought to yourself, "I'd like to be meeker"? I doubt it. It's not usually considered a quality that any of us actually want. That's because meekness and weakness are often used synonymously. To be meek is to be weak, and no one really wants to be weak. And that's especially true in a society where the strongest don't only survive, but thrive. In our society, these things appear to be true. If you are rich, you are strong. If you are white, you are strong. If you are married, you are strong. If you own a home, you are strong. If you have a car, you are strong. If you have a college degree, you are strong. If you are a man, you are strong. If you have employees, you are strong. If you have a stock portfolio, you are strong. If you have a vacation home, you are strong. If you have a 401k, you are strong. And yet Jesus stands before the crowd that day, and frankly before us this evening, and he says, "Blessed are the meek." In my research for this evening, I found that it's popular among pastors and commentators to say that meekness is not weakness. The argument that follows is essentially that Jesus wasn't weak because he turned over tables in the temple and he endured a gruesome death on the cross. Therefore, meekness and weakness cannot be the same thing. Honestly, I disagree. I believe that Jesus was weak. I believe that he became weak. That was the whole point. God cannot become a human and forfeit power, authority, praise, and paradise and not choose weakness at the same time. This is the emptying that Paul refers to in Philippians 2. This is weakness, and we have to stop being so afraid of it. We're terrified of weakness in the West. We can't stand the thought of it. It's like an infection that we want so badly to be rid of. We find it icky and uncomfortable even to be near, even if others have it and we don't. It's more like a phobia, honestly. We have a weakness phobia, and it's making it really hard to follow the way of Jesus when he sets an example of willing weakness. Every church that closed its door this weekend and next is quick to talk about how they aren't doing it out of a spirit of fear. I understand that because we in fact have nothing to fear, because when God is for us, who can be against us? However, to beat our chests and convince everyone we're not afraid, when in fact we're at least a little afraid, is a dishonest ploy that perpetuates our weakness phobia. We can't stand looking weak, so we say over and over again that we aren't afraid, and in doing so, potentially shame those who are feeling real fear. Fear is weakness, and some people are afraid right now. Some people are weak right now, and that's okay. Now is not a time to reject weakness. Now is a time to embrace it and work toward healing. I think that meekness and weakness are closely related. Although not synonymous, meekness and weakness have a lot in common. Meekness carries with it a confidence as well. It's like a combination of strength and weakness somehow. Like if you could be weak strongly or strongly weak, you would be approaching meekness. So here's my definition of meekness for you. Meekness is a humble capitulation of power. Meekness is a humble capitulation of power. Sometimes that capitulation or relinquishing is circumstantial, and sometimes it's chosen and intentional. Sometimes it's thrust upon us by our circumstances, and sometimes it's chosen because we know that it's the right thing. Our circumstances of life might deliver weakness to us. If you do not possess one or more of the things that I listed a moment ago, you might be experiencing circumstantial meekness, meaning you might be in a situation resulting from your income or lack thereof, your mental or emotional state, your race, your nationality, your lack of status in society that lends itself to meekness or a position of humility or weakness. Meekness also comes about by choice, though. Although there have been many times in my life when I have experienced circumstantial meekness, my circumstances typically lend themselves to power and privilege. Perhaps you can relate with this. I found it vital to following the way of Jesus, to choose meekness in my life, which typically requires a purposeful and intentional capitulation of power every chance that I get. If your circumstances dictate that you are meek, Jesus says you are blessed. You might remember from weeks past that to be blessed is to belong. It means that you are in. You are part of God's family. You are part of this family. This is to say nothing of your emotional response to meekness. You might not be happy about being meek at all, and frankly, I don't blame you. Being meek can be really hard sometimes, and no one is telling you that you have to be happy or cheery about it. Rather, the Beatitudes are declarations. They are announcements that you are in fact blessed, and that you belong, and that you are seen and known, and you are significant. Jesus goes on to say that you will inherit the earth. This is difficult to discern exactly what Jesus means, but there's a strong possibility that he's referencing Psalm 37:11, which says, "The meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity." The language in both the Beatitude and the Psalm conjure up an image of royalty overlooking and taking responsibility for their kingdom. We don't live in a monarchical system of government, so it can be tough for us to understand this. Remember that scene in The Lion King when Mufasa tells Simba that everything that the light touches belongs to him, and they're like standing up there on Pride Rock, which overlooks this huge area of land? That scene is an example of kingly rule over a place. In short, Jesus is saying that you will inherit power. Isn't that ironic? To lack power or to purposefully relinquish power will result in inheriting power. We don't know if Jesus is saying this will happen in our lifetime or perhaps in our life with him after death. It certainly falls in line with the other upside-down teachings of his, like when he says the first shall be last and the last shall be first. The great thing about the Beatitudes is that the result or the reward of each isn't ever communicated as something to be obtained. That is, Jesus is never saying that you should try for the kingdom of heaven or that you should strive to inherit the earth. You don't need to worry about whether or not you have that or can obtain that. Rather, he encourages you that you are blessed if you are meek. Someday, Jesus says, the tables will turn and authority will be yours. I can't say for sure when or what that will look like or what form that will take, but he says it's true. Meekness is unpopular, especially in a world that celebrates aggressive masculinity and overbearing prowess. Meekness isn't something we are encouraged to pursue, and yet it's something that Jesus celebrated. Being meek isn't being a sissy or being pathetic. Being meek isn't feminine or soft. Being meek is genderless. Being meek is part of following the way of Jesus. Whether you choose it or it chooses you, your meekness comes with a status of blessing, and someday the tables will turn and you will inherit authority yet again. Commentator William Barclay translates this verse like this: "Blessed is the man who has the humility to know his own ignorance, his own weakness, and his own need." We have a unique opportunity to practice generosity and gentleness right now, both of which find their roots in meekness. Some of you are hurting because you are either actually ill or your whole life has been turned upside down by illness all around you. Some of you have no idea what you're going to do for work during this pandemic. Some of you have no idea what you're going to do with your children while they're out of school. Some of you aren't sure how you will feed or shelter your kids while they are out of school. Some of you need toilet paper, and others of you are hoarding toilet paper. Some people in our community have needs that others of us can actually meet. Meekness, either circumstantial or chosen, will be required by all of us if we are to actually be the church and a church family during this time. So here are a few questions I'd like for you to consider. I'd love for you to discuss them with your family or roommates or some neighbors or somebody, so that there's some level of dialogue around these. Here's the first question. If you are in need of something, food, help, friendship, shelter, who can you reach out to in the next 24 hours to ask for help? If no one comes immediately to mind, you can at least reach out to me at nathan@thesacredgrace.com. And I would love to help you get connected to willing people in our church who want to help in this time. If you came up with a person or two that you can be in contact with, please contact them within the next 24 hours to ask for the help that you need, whether it's big or small. Asking for help is hard, but it is a version of meekness that we must practice in this time. This is not a time for pride. This is not a time for false strength. This is a time to practice meekness and to ask for help when and wherever we can. Here's a second question. If you are not in need at this moment, but you have resources to spare, who can you reach out to in the next 24 hours to offer help? If you can't think of anyone right away, start with the people you share a wall or a property line with. Just knock on all those doors right around wherever you live and say, I'm your neighbor and I'm just checking to see if there's anything that you need. This is a purposeful and willing capitulation of power. This is practicing purposeful meekness. You might also do this via text or email. I encourage you to check in with 3 to 5 people per day and ask this same question. Is there anything I can do to help you? Here's the last question. Is meekness a purposeful or circumstantial capitulation of power in your life? Which is it for you? Is it circumstantial or purposeful or perhaps both? Think of something that you can do this week to celebrate and perpetuate meekness in your life. Schedule it and tell someone else about it. It's not something to be ashamed of. So let's identify it, celebrate it, and tell other people about it. That's all for my homily this week. Thank you for tuning in. Please keep your eye on our Instagram feed and story for more ways to stay connected, and please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything that you need at all. I hope you'll consider joining us in person or via our Instagram live stream tonight at 5 p.m. in my backyard for a baptism service. Now, receive the benediction. Meekness is unpopular, especially in a world that celebrates aggressive masculinity and overbearing prowess. Meekness isn't something we are encouraged to pursue, and yet it's something that Jesus celebrated. My prayer for you tonight is that you will discover, embrace, and celebrate meekness in your life, even when the world around you is terrified of it. As you go about your evening, may the peace of Christ go with you.